Shalom, Bruchim Habayim, and welcome to Shevi'im Panim LaTorah, to the 70 Faces of the Torah, and also Sulam Yaakov. This week's Torah portion is Parashat Shoftim, which in Hebrew means judges, and it's a reference to the Sanhedrin, which is the legal body that governs the nation of Israel. They are also what makes up the rabbinical court of those who sit in what we call the Kisei Moshe, the seat of Moses. And Parashat Shoftim actually corresponds to Parashat Mishpatim back in the Chumash of Shemot, or the book of Exodus, in which the Torah there issues many of the, you could say, the branches that extend from the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 utterances of God, in which we also start to delve into what we call the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah. And so really Parashat Shoftim is one of the Torah portions that we learn about the oral law, as well as what's from the Torah Shebektav, the written law, the written Torah. I know there's proponents out there to that, some small factions that exist in the Jewish world today, as well as those that existed thousands of years ago, such as the Sudukim or Sadducees, who were opposed of a Torah Sheba'al Peh or oral Torah. However, for today, we're not going to be dealing with that topic, even though we could easily show and prove the legitimacy of what we call the oral Torah, the Masorah, and things of that nature, the transmission of it. But we're going to be focusing on a different topic for Parashat Shoftim. So I have subtitled this teaching, Conquering the Beginning from the End. In this week's Torah portion, the Torah speaks about when the Jewish people go out to war. They should not fear the enemy because Hashem is with them. We read here in Devarim 20, verse 1, Ki tetzei lamilchama ha'oyevecha v'ra'ita suz v'rachev amrav mimcha lo tira mechem ki Adonai Elohecha imach hama'acha me'eretz Mitzrayim. When you go out to war against your enemies, very repetitive to what we find in the very beginning of Parashat Ki tetzah, which is also dedicated to going out to war, and you see the horse and chariot of people more numerous than you, you shall not fear them, for Hashem your God is with you. This is Hashem who has elevated you, brought you up from out of the land of Mitzrayim. From here, the Torah then goes on to make a list of individuals who are either eligible or not eligible to serving in the Israeli army, the Jewish army. And we see amongst those not eligible is an individual who just got married, one who built a new home, or one who had just planted a vineyard. The Torah does not permit these individuals to go to war. We read here in Devarim 20, verse 5 through 7, V'diberu hashoterim, and therefore the officers, El Ha'am, they shall speak more to the people, and they shall ask the question here, Michaish asher bana vayir chadash v'lo chanocho, who is a man who's just built a new house and has not dedicated it? Well, let that individual return to his home, lest he die in war, and another man will then come and dedicate the home. Also, umichaish asher natak kerem v'lo chililo yelech. Well, who's the man who's just planted a vineyard? If he's planted a new vineyard or whatever, and has not redeemed it, well, let him return v'yashav leveto, to his home. At least he die in war, another man will redeem it. And also, umichaish asher eros isha, who's the man who's just become betrothed to a woman and has not consummated the marriage. There's two stages in Jewish thought to kedushin, or marriage. You have the betrothal state and the actual consummation of the public ceremony. And whoever has not done this, the Torah says, well, let that individual return to his home, lest he die in war, and another man will come and marry the betrothed woman. Now, the Torah goes on to mention the last person that's not eligible to participate in war is an individual who is fearful. And the Torah prohibits this person from joining the army because his fear may spread to others, causing them to become afraid as well. We read in verse 8, it says that the officers will continue, let the Be'ah Ha'am, to speak to the people, Ve'ameru, and they shall say, Mi cha'ish hayarei, who is an individual who is fearful, Verach halevav, who is faint-hearted. Well, let this individual return leveto, to his house, velo yimas, and let him not weaken et levav echav, the heart of his brothers, kilvavo, like his heart. Interesting. So we see that the Torah says that you have 4 individuals not eligible to participate in war. You have a person who is fearful. You You have a person who just built a vineyard, a person who just got betrothed, and a person who just built a new home. These four individuals are not eligible to go to war because psychologically, if they're in the trenches on the battlefield and they start to think about these things and fear not being able to return to them, that it would basically weaken the strength, the numbers of the other Jews on the battlefield, and therefore that can also inject fear into the eyes of others, in which they also become weak and they can also return. But is there a correlation between building a home and planting a vineyard or even becoming betrothed? I mean, there's many individuals that serve in our armed forces, whether it's here in the United States or whether it's in Israel, who may possibly fit under those conditions. I mean, yet they're not being turned away from their service unless obviously there's a health condition or some sorts. So is there a connection with these individuals? That's something we'll come back to towards the end of this teaching. Now, one of the things I want to point out is that Parashat Shoftim is usually the first Torah portion we read going into the month of Elul. That's interesting. And because every Torah portion usually has a meaning. There's a meaning obviously within itself, but there's an added meaning whenever it's in conjunction to a Rosh Chodesh or a specific day during the week of a holiday. Usually there's a connection there. So how does this differ? Parashat Shoftim, how does this Torah portion differ, to other Parashiot that are read during the new month? Over Masachet Menachot, the sages comment upon the individual that is prohibited or not eligible to go into war because of fear. And there Chazal explain that the prohibition of going to war based on fear is actually a reference to violating the mitzvah of Tefillin, specifically to an individual who speaks between putting the Tefillin shel Yad, the Tefillin of the Araman, and the Tefillin shel Rosh, the Tefillin of the head. And for those that don't know, normally when you put Tefillin on, there's two separate brachot or blessings that we say. We put the Araman first, and then we put the head Tefillin on, and then we also, depending on your Nusach, Ashkenaz, Sephardic, etc., there may be some slight, small additional prayers that one says in between them before they continue with their morning prayers. But halachically speaking, one is not prohibited to speak in between putting the Shel Yad or Shel Rosh on. And so Chazal say that the individual that is not eligible to go to war is because they have violated that mitzvah. We see here in Menachot 36a, it says that if one spoke between donning tefillin of the arm and tefillin of the head, he has sinned. And due to that sin, he must return from the ranks of soldiers waging war. Fascinating. But how does Chazal arrive at the understanding that when the Torah prohibits a man from going to war because of fear, that it's actually due to the violation of the mitzvah of tefillin? Where did they get that from? If that's the case, why didn't the Torah simply mention the mitzvah of tefillin when going to war? It doesn't say it. So how does Chazal come to this understanding? Rabbi Shaul Lieberman, in his commentary to the Talmud, he explained that when Israel is faithful in fulfilling the mitzvah of tefillin, they will have great success in war. And so Rabbi Lieberman connects Chazal's words here in Menachot with Devarim 33:20, where there the Torah refers to severing the arm and head of the enemy, in which the Torah says, V'taraf zeroah, you shall sever the arm, and also af kadkod, and also the head. It's an interesting passage, and we'll revisit that as well as we go through the teaching. So from here, what we learn is that if a person is careful not to violate the mitzvah of tefillin by speaking between putting on tefillin shel yad and tefillin shel rosh, that they will be zoche or merit, having the ability to severing the enemy's arm and head in war. In fact, Rashi, in his commentary on this verse that Rav Lieberman quotes, that's found in Parashat V'zo HaBracha, he points out that victims that die in their war with Israel, they were easily identified by their arms and heads that were severed in war. We see Rashi's commentary here. He says that those harugehen that were killed, that they were identifiable. How? Well, the Jews, they would cut off the head and also in the arm with a single b'macha achat, a single blow. Okay, this is strange, fascinating, but I mean, what's going on here? I mean, is this the special merit that waits those who are faithful in the mitzvah of tefillin? I mean, let's think about this. I mean, a person is zoche to be able to kill their enemies with a single blow, because somehow when you're faithful to the mitzvah of tefillin, you can simultaneously sever the head and the arm of the enemy? I mean, what's this mean? When the Torah speaks about decapitating the arm and head of the enemy, first we have to have some context. It appears in the blessing that Moshe bestowed upon Shevet Gad, the tribe of Gad. And so just for context, we'll read here the Pasuk in Deuteronomy 33, 20 through 21. It says, Ul Gad Amar, and regarding God, Moshe says over here, Baruch Marchiv Gad, blessed in he who broadens God. He dwells like a lion. And here we find the verse, V'taraf zeroa af kakol, tearing off arm and head. And therefore, Vayareshit lo kisham helkach mechoked. He chose the first portion for himself, for that is where the lawgiver's plot, Safon, is hidden. And therefore he came at the head of the nation, carrying out Hashem's justice and his ordinances, im Israel, with Israel. Interesting. Now, God, along with Shevet Ruvain and half of Manasseh, the Torah tells us they dwelled on the eastern side of the Jordan. And so, in today's world, this would be considered parts of Syria. So due to their loyalty and obedience to helping the Jewish people conquer Eretz Israel proper, which is the west side of the Jordan, we see that the tribe of Gad was blessed with the largest territory compared to the tribes that dwelled on the west side of the Jordan. Now, in his commentary to this verse, Rabbeinu Bachaya explained that because God was faithful in fulfilling the mitzvah of tefillin, they were blessed with the strength to sever the arm and head of their enemies. This is why Moshe is bestowing this blessing upon them as they were a lion, able to ripping off the arm and the head of the enemy. Okay, interesting. And Rabbeinu Bachai says that this is because Shevet Gad was very diligent in the mitzvah of tefillin. Okay, let's delineate here for a little bit. In halakha, if a man has only one of the batim, or the houses of tefillin, whether it's a shel yad or a shel rosh, just one, he's missing one or the other, halachically, that individual is still required to wear that one, even if they're missing the other tefillin. And logic would sit there and think that the absence of one of the pieces of tefillin would render the mitzvah of tefillin possible or obsolete, but it does not. How so? Well, according to halakha, when it comes to the mitzvah of tefillin, the shel yad and shel rosh, they are considered two separate mitzvot, positive mitzvot, by the way, which is why they require their own blessing. And so if the tefillin shel yad and shel rosh are two separate mitzvot, and if one is lacking one of the tefillin, they're still required to wear it, why is it a prohibition to speak between putting them on then? Right? Think about it. If you're missing one, what's the point of uttering a few words while putting the other one on then? You're missing one. So what's going on? So according to, let's say, spiritual hierarchy, Shevet Gad is considered the sixth tribe out of the 12 tribes of Israel. Shevet Yehuda is considered the first tribe. Now, we know in the Hebrew calendar there are 12 months. The months of the calendar actually correspond to the tribes of Israel. And so Shevet Yehuda will correspond to Chodesh Nisan, while Shevet Gad corresponds to Chodesh Elul. And the first Torah portion for Chodesh Elul is Parashat Shoftim, in which we are learning about the prohibition of speaking between putting tefillin shel yad and shel rosh on. And so in a way you could say that by violating the mitzvah of tefillin, you are some way weakening the spiritual power of Shevet Gad. Okay, what does that mean? Well, what does the name God mean in Hebrew? According to Chazal, the name God is actually a reference to avodah zarah, to idolatry. Very shocking. We see here in Masechet Shabbat 67b, it says over here in the name of Rav Yehuda, that is more severe than the ways of the Emorite, as God is nothing other than a term of idolatry, as it's stated, quoting from Isaiah 65, verse 11, Ve'atem ozvei Adonai, and it says, and you that forsake Hashem, that forget Har Kodshi, my holy mountain, and do what? Ha'olchin lagad, and prepare a table for God, and that offer mingle wine in full measure unto what's called mini. And so therefore we see here, God Gadi is a form of prayer, Chazal say, to an idol. Now, God is actually the child of Zilpah, who was the shifcha or maidservant of Leah. We go back here to Bereshit, Genesis chapter 30, verse 10 through 11. And it says afterwards, Vatel Zilpah shichat Leah, and Zilpah, the shifcha or the maidservant of Leah, it says that she bore Yaakov ben, a son. And we see Vatomer Leah, Leah then names the child. And she says, oh, and we have these brackets in Hebrew, and this is based upon how we derive the word and where it's phonetically from. And it says, Begad, Bagad, and I'll explain it in a minute, good luck has come to me, of Atira Eshemo God. So Leah calls this child God. Now, in the Hebrew, we see there's two different spelling variations here. The phrase Begad is written in the Torah as a single word. Bagad, okay, is pronounced as if it's, we separate it as if it's two words. Bagad, which mean God, luck, ba, come, okay, Begad. So by understanding the Hebrew in this manner, you can actually understand why Leah named God God. In other words, she viewed his birth as some type of good mazel, some type of good fortune. Now, Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, in his commentary, explained that the birth of God was not expected and appeared to be some good chance of luck, some lucky fortune. And Masechet Shabbat, when Chazal say the name of God is a reference to avodah zarah, they don't mean that it's a name to a specific idol, but that it was like a mantra that was used among idolaters that attributed their blessings from good luck. So how can we relate to that today? If you grew up seeing those little 4 rabbit's foots, remember, like a lucky rabbit's foot people would have, or certain things, some form of superstitious things that you would have, or, you know, people they would have a little Buddha in their home, maybe rub the belly, whatever floated your boat, you know, when it comes to having some type of good luck charm. This is essentially what the term name God arises from. It's like a mantra that idolaters would say to attribute their blessings from good luck, in their way of winning the ancient lottery per se. Now, it's also interesting to point out that the 3 tribes that settled on the eastern side of the Jordan, they were the firstborn of their respective birth mothers. So Ruvain was from Leah, Gad was from Zilpah, and Manasseh was from Asnat. And we know that was from obviously his father is, you know, Yosef HaSadiq back in Mitzrayim. But these 3 are the firstborn in their moms. Now, in Hebrew, a name is not just a name. It's not like, you know, I can't say that with all cultures and languages. English specifically maybe is more of the broken of the language system. But in Hebrew, a name is not just a name. Rather, the name of a person or a thing in Hebrew actually alludes to the essence that's contained within that individual or that thing. So why would Hashem allow God to be named after a term, a mantra that was associated with idolatry? For idolatry to be eradicated, you gotta listen closely to this. For idolatry to be eradicated, one has to come from the root of idolatry, okay? And in fact, we see this concept in the Hebrew language. for instance. The word for root in Hebrew is called shoresh. To uproot the root of something is called lisharesh, which means to be able to transform something, you must have a connection to it. In Parashat Matot, after conquering the cities on the eastern side of the Jordan, the Torah tells us how the Bnei Gad and Reuven changed the name of the conquered Gentile cities. We read here in Bamidbar, Numbers 32, 34 through 38. It says over there, Vayivnu v'nei Gad et Divon, and the children of God built Divon, and also ve'et Atarot, and also ve'et Aroer. And it mentions after ve'et Atarot Shofan, and also ve'et Yazer. And we also read of another place called V'yagbaha, and then it mentions ve'et Beit Nimra, ve'et Beit Haran, Arei Mivsar, V'girot So'an. And I'm just reading these in Hebrew. You can feel free to read the translation there in English, which has the J letter, which we don't have in Hebrew. And then it says Uvnei Ruvain, Banu et Cheshbon. And the children of Ruvain, they built Cheshbon, ve'et El Alei, ve'et Kiryatam. And then also ve'et Nivo, ve'et Baal Me'on. And then look what it says here in yellow. And it says Musabot Shem. And they called them, literally changed them to other et shivma names. Vayichreu v'shemot et shemot he'arim asher banu. A set of the names that the cities had when they originally were built. This phrase here that you see first highlighted in yellow, Musabot Shem, refers to changing the name of something. Rashi in his commentary comes along to tell us Nibo uva'al me'on shemot. Nibo and Ba'al me'on are names of pagan deities. And the Amorites would call their cities by the name of their pagan deity. So he goes on to mention Uvnei Ruvain. However, the Bnei Ruvain altered their name to other names. And this is the meaning of what we read in the Hebrew when it mentions here Musabot Shem. The name Anibo and Baal Me'on were altered, it says, L'Shem Acher, to another name. So since God's name was rooted or associated, we should say, with Avodah Zarah, he had the power to uproot idolatry from the cities on the eastern side of the Jordan, along with the Bnei Ruvain and Manasseh. Interesting. Over in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, Chazal taught that Hashem's measure of judgment for the new year is weighed upon the events that happen at the end of the year. We read here in Rosh Hashanah 16b. It says over here, Rav Yitzchak says, any year that is poor and troubled at its beginning will be made rich at its end. For it's stated, quoting from Devarim 11:12. It says here, Mereshit Hashana, Mereshit, from the beginning of the year. The verse continues until Ahrit, at the end of the year, which means that the end of the year will have expectation of good things in the Ahrit, in the end. Now, in this specific passage, Rav Yitzchak is focusing on the defective spelling, of the word Mereshit. And you'll see here in the Hebrew, without the nikudot, the vowel points, that there is a letter aleph missing, and the second time Reshit is highlighted. And so Mereshit, spelled without of aleph, allows you to read the Hebrew word as Rashut, which literally means poverty. And so Rav Yitzchak over here is teaching that one who started the year all spiritually poor will end the year spiritually rich. However, the Gemara then goes on to argue that Hashem does not judge a person based upon their actions in the future. Rather, Hashem judges a person based on their current actions. We read here in the continuation of the Gemara. And Rav Yitzchak said, a man is judged only according to his deeds at the time of his judgment, and not according to his future deeds, as is stated with regards to Ishmael, quoting here from Genesis 21, verse 17, which is when Ishmael did not have any water and his mother was concerned for him. And this is over here, Ki shema Elohim el kol hana'ar, and God heard the voice of the child where he is, in that direct location. So it says, although Ishmael and his descendants will act wickedly in the future, his prayer was heard and answered because he was innocent at that time. If Hashem judges a person based upon their current actions, what does Rav Yitzchak mean when he teaches if a person who starts the year off spiritually poor or unworthy, they will end the year spiritually rich? We could say that depending on the quality of one's teshuvah during the Yamin Norin, the days of all between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that would determine the fruit of their judgment, which appears at the end of the year, which is Chodesh Tishrei. And so one who does a Shuvah Shlema, true teshuvah, during the holidays, even though they have no spiritual merit due to their transgressions, they would reap God's blessing by the end of the year. It would just take time to spiritually germinate, to come to fruition. So in light of what we are learning in this week's Torah portion, I would like to suggest an alternative approach to what the Gemara is saying over here. Now, I mentioned earlier, Parashat Shoftim is the first Torah portion that is read for Chodesh Elul. Chodesh Elul is the month of God. And as we learned earlier from Masachet Menachot, the mitzvah of Tefillin relates to going to war. And here in Masachet Rosh Hashanah, we learn the end of the year is determined by the beginning. So when Rav Yitzchak teaches about being spiritually poor at the beginning of the year, it's based upon being spiritually poor at the end of the year, which means one leaves the previous year, Elul, the 11th month of the Hebrew calendar, spiritually poor, stands before HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the beginning of the year, Tishrei, as a beggar. Thus they are begging Hashem through their Shuvah to bless them with a sweet new year, which is also symbolic of the reason why we dip apples in honey. And so God was given a name that's associated with idolatry, because the ability to destroy idolatry must come from within. It's just like Moshe Rabbeinu was the only individual who could destroy Mitzrayim because he came from within Mitzrayim. It was a system he was brought up within. And so this teaches us that God, who is associated with Elul, which is the end of the year, has the ability to affect the beginning of the year based upon his actions in Elul. The Bnei Gad dwelled in the conquered land of Sichon. The very first territory that the Jewish people conquered was Sichon. That's on the eastern side of the Jordan. And according to the Midrash, the land of Sichon was conquered in Chodesh Elul. We see here Bamidbar Rabbah, 1932, Yesh Omrim Melchemet Sichon Asu Be'elul. The Jewish people waged war against Sichon in the month of Elul. Okay, well, how in the world did the Midrash know the Jews went to war with Sichon and Elul? Well, the Torah tells us back in Parashat Huchat that when Aharon died, it was on the first of Chodesh Av. That's back in Numbers 20, verse 29. And we do know that the Jewish people, they mourned for the death of Aharon for a full 30 days. And after mourning Aharon's death, the Torah mentions that the people then went and waged war with Sichon. And so it was Elul when the Jews went to war with Sichon. Now earlier I mentioned the acquisition of Eretz Israel began by first conquering the eastern side of the Jordan. The conquering of the land of Sichon is considered Reshit, is considered the beginning. The three tribes that inherited the land of Sichon, Gad, Reuven, and Manasseh, they were also the firstborn of their respective mothers. And so we see how the firstborn acquired the first fruits of conquering Eretz Israel. But isn't the eastern side of the Jordan outside of Eretz Israel proper? Yes, that is true. But to acquire Eretz Israel proper, you first needed to conquer the land of Sichon. And so over in Parashat V'zo HaBracha, when the Torah refers to the blessing bestowed upon Sheva Gad, it mentions that God saw the first portion for himself. We'll go back to that passage here, Deuteronomy chapter 33, Verse 21, Vayrach Reshit Lo, God saw the first portion, Reshit Lo, for him. For him he saw it. So on the Pashat, the basic interpretation of this text, when the verse says Vayrach Reshit Lo, it's alluding to the first portion of inheriting Eretz Israel, which in God's case would be the land of Sichon. However, how did the Bnei Gad conquer the land of Sichon? How? How did they do it? They did it through the Torah of Moshe, which according to the Derech Sod, the inner meaning of the Torah, the phrase Vayach Reshit Lo alludes to Moshe. That's who it alludes to. In fact, if we expand the verse a little bit more here, jump up to verse 25 to 27, going back to Numbers, not from Deuteronomy. We'll come back to this in a moment about Moshe, but we'll jump back here to Numbers 32, 25 to 27. We see here, Vayomer b'nei Gad uvnei Reuven el Moshe. Moshe, okay, they said to Moshe, the children of God, Reuven, what did they say to him? Avdecha ya'asucha asher Adoni mitzaveh. Your servants shall do as my master commands. Now we know contextually Moshe requested for them, before they could settle on the eastern side of the Jordan, to please help their brothers succeed on the western end of the Jordan. They complied. So they're basically responding to that. But we see this as a direct obedience to Moshe Rabbeinu. And so they mentioned, yes, our small children, livestock, and our animals will be there in the cities of the Gilad, and your servants shall cross over every armed person of the legion before Hashem to do battle kasher Adoni dover, as my master speaks. So since Bnei Gad were loyal to the teachings of Moshe, the Torah mentions that Bnei Gad merited having Moshe buried in their territory. Now we'll go back to V'zo HaBracha, Deuteronomy 33:21. Vayach Reshit Lo, he saw the portion for himself. Hisham chelkat mechokek safon. For that is where the lawgiver's plot is safon, hidden. Who's the lawgiver? It's Moshe Rabbeinu. He came, Vaitei Roshei Am, at the head of the nation. That's Moshe. Okay? And therefore, Sidkat Adonai Asa, at the head, carrying out Hashem's justice and ordinances, Im Israel, with Israel. Now we can also say Bnei Gad came at the head of the nation, leading the front in the war, but we also know spiritually this refers to Moshe Rabbeinu. And in fact, Rabbeinu Bachai's commentary on this passage is just quoted from, I don't have it on the screen, I'm just recalling it from memory. He mentioned that Moshe is the embodiment of Reshit Chochmah, the Sfirot. In other words, the psychological blueprint of the Sfirot. And basically, he mentions how Shevet Gad was worthy to have him concealed in their territory since they eternalized the Torah. Now, Shevet Gad, who's associated with Chodesh Elul, which is considered the Acharit, the end of the year, they have their strength in Moshe, who is called Reshit, the beginning. Reshit, once again, is the beginning of the year. It's also Kabbalistically associated with Hashem. So God's ability to draw strength through Torah to Moshe at the end of the year helps them to enter the beginning of the year with God's blessing. From here, we learn a powerful lesson. There is a dichotomy between God, including Bnei Reuven and Manasseh, and the Jews that lived in Eretz Israel. At Parashat Ve'echanan, Moshe warned the Jewish people that once they entered the land, they would become spiritually complacent. They would become spiritually weak, and that weakness would cause them to be exiled from the land. We'll go back to Devarim 4:25 to 27. Moshe says, Ki tole banin, that when you start to have children, and also uvnei vanim, and grandchildren, and have also become old in the land. It's not really mentioning senior citizens discounts over here. V'noshatem ba'aretz, you will grow corrupt. I mean, I'm not sure when you've seen some 80-year-olds, besides politicians, right? maybe some senile politicians, but I haven't seen any 80-year-old gangbangers and drug traffickers. Not that there aren't a few mafia dons out there and cartel members, maybe in all the ranks, but you get the gist, right? Moshe's not talking about the senior citizen community running an organized, elaborate, cartel or anything here. So we'll learn about what this means in a second. But when you become old in the land, you will grow corrupt and make a carved image, the likeness of anything, and you will do evil, harav be'enei Adonai Elohecha, in the eyes of Hashem your God, to anger him. And the Torah goes on to say, I appoint heaven and earth this day to bear witness against you, that you will surely perish quickly from the land to which you are crossing the Yarden or the Jordan. To possess, you shall not have length of days upon it, for you will be destroyed. Hashem will scatter you among the peoples, and you will be left few in number among the nations where Hashem will lead you. Now, the reference here, and I didn't highlight in yellow, but the reference here in Yashen, which is the root of what we see here, V'no Shantem, which is translated becoming old, that has nothing to do with physical age, okay? Yashen has nothing to do with being physically old. Rather, it has to do with becoming spiritually weak, spiritually infirmed. And so the people become spiritually weak because they neglected the Torah of Moshe. Now, compared to the Jewish people living in Eretz Israel proper, the rest of the tribes, we see Bnei Gad prospered on the eastern side of the Jordan. Why? Well, because of their faithfulness to the Torah of Moshe. And so this dichotomy between Shevet Gad and the rest of the Shoftim in Eretz Israel proper is really a mashal or a parable about life. Life is a journey. That journey is filled with hardships and difficulties. For some people, they think that making it to Eretz HaKodesh is the goal. However, we learn in the Torah that unless we are connected to the Torah of Moshe, while even living in Eretz HaKodesh, we can become complacent. We can become spiritually weak and lose our chelik, or our portion in Eretz HaKodesh. To other people, they're like Shevet Gad. They're at the precipice of entering the land. Because the Bnei Gad are at the precipice of entering the land, they don't have time to become lackadaisical. That means they're always on guard. They're ready to strike a deadly blow to the enemy. When the Chazal mentioned, back in Masachet Menachot, one who violates the mitzvah of tefillin by speaking between putting on tefillin shel yad and tefillin shel rosh, they are alluding to the lackadaisical attitude of the Yetzer Hara that tries to make us complacent when it comes to dealing with our egos. When God is blessed with the ability, compared to a lion, to v'tarav zeroa avkakod, sever the arm and the head of the enemy, that's an allusion to the mitzvah of tefillin. The reference to severing the arm and the head is allusion to cutting off the impulse of the Yetzer Hara. And so the deeper meaning to the mitzvah of tefillin is that tefillin acts as a safeguard against the senses of the body, or body consciousness, which we use to indulge into forbidden desires. Because tefillin reminds us that we must subjugate our bodily desires to Hashem, our five senses specifically. And I did a complete study on this back in, I think, Parashat Bo, in which I talk about the five senses corresponding to tefillin, which is also why when we say Kriyat Shema in the morning, there's the custom of taking your hand, covering your eyes. The five fingers correspond to the five senses. The five senses are the five portals to the body, which also correlate to the soul. If one is always allowing impurity to come in through these channels, they damper their soul. And so when one is vigilant, the application of tefillin, when we physically do it, it also has a deep symbolic meaning as well. So when it comes to Chodesh Tishrei, everybody stands before Hashem as beggars and orphans. They're pleading with HaKadosh Baruch Hu to favor them for a sweet new year. However, where's everybody at during Chodesh Elul? Where are they at? Most people at this time, they're spiritually bankrupt. Forget about the world right now, what's happening with the economy. People are struggling, living check to check. Spiritually, people are spiritually bankrupt. One of the customs that we have during Chodesh Elul is to blow the shofar after Shachrit, after morning prayer. And some communities have the custom of yelling out after the shofar is blown. A quotation from Jeremiah 3:14, it says, Shuvu vani shovavim. Return, O wayward sons. The custom of blowing the shofar for Chodesh Elul actually comes from when Moshe ascended Har Sinai during Chodesh Elul, and he stayed there for 40 days and 40 nights, in which he brought the second set of tablets down on the 10th of Tishrei, which was Yom Kippur. And so according to Chazal, to ensure that the people did not fall victim to Avodah Zarah like they did the first time Moshe went up Mount Sinai, there was a shofar that was blown daily to remind the people. And so we learn here that the purpose in creating, let's say, the golden calf was a replacement for Moshe. The people erred in calculating when Moshe will return. That's why the Torah says in Parashat Kitasa, they thought he was dead. In fact, the Midrash says a Satan appeared before them, showing this image that Moshe had died. And so the people started to create this Egel Zahav, this replacement for Moshe. So to counter history from repeating itself, a shofar was blown daily during Chodesh Elul. The shofar is an instrument that's used in going to war. The sound is to remind us to be on guard against the enemy, in this case, our Yetzer Hara. This teaches us, even if one is spiritually bankrupt by Chodesh Elul, hope is not lost. Shevet Gad is the tribe of Chodesh Elul. They are the tribe who sits at the precipice of entering the land. The Torah describes God once again as a lion that rips off the arm and the head of the enemy. Going back to V'zoh HaBracha, Devarim 33, verse 20 through 21. And it says, Ugad Amar Baruch Marchim Gad, Kil Avi Shachein V'taraf Zeroa Av Kakol. Blessed is he who broadens God. He dwells like a lioness. I said a lion, lioness, excuse the typo, tearing off the arm and head. Therefore, Vayachar Shilo, he chose the first portion for himself. Why is that? Kisham Chachat Mechoket Safon. That is where the lawgiver's plot is hidden. He came at the head of the nation, carrying Hashem's justice and ordinances with Israel. What is a lion? A lion is an animal that is a master of vigilance. When one is on guard against the forces of the Yetzer Hara, they must be ready like a lion, ready to sever the impure forces that come from the body. I love this saying in Pirkei Avot, how we should have the different personality traits of the animal kingdom within us when it comes to serving Hashem. Not that we act like animals, God forbid, like a behemoth, but the positive character traits. Chazal said in Pirkei Avot that we should be bold as a leopard, v'chal kanesher, light as an eagle, and also swift as a deer, v'gibor ka'ari, strong as a lion, la'asot ratzon avicha shebashamayim, to carry out, to perform the will of our Father in heaven. The reason we must be vigilant during Chodesh Elul is because we are at the precipice of entering Chodesh Tishrei, of entering a new year. In concluding my teaching here for Parashat Shoftim, I'd like to share what the Rambam had to say regarding the verse of the Torah prohibiting or mentioning those individuals who are not eligible to go into war. We'll go here to the Mishnah Torah, Chachot HaMalachim, and dealing with the laws of kings. The font's a little low there, hopefully you guys can make out. I crammed it all in there. He goes on to say here, quoting from the Torah, this week's Torah portion, in which the Torah says, Micha ish hayarei verach halevav. Which man is there who is fearful and faint-hearted? The Rambam says, exactly so, this is one whose heart has no strength to withstand the strains of war. Now, once he becomes entangled with the perplexities of war, he should trust the hope of Israel, which is a reference to God. And he will save him in times of trouble. He should know, and this is important, I even highlighted this here, he should v'yeda sha'al yechud Hashem. He should know, this is not a command to believe, but know that he is doing what? Battle for the unity of the name, the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei Ose Milchama. And he should place his life in his hands and neither be afraid nor alarmed. He should not think about his wife nor his children. Rather, he should wipe away thoughts of them from his heart and clear himself of everything for the war. Anyone who thinks about or contemplates matters during the battle and frightens himself violates a negative mitzvah, as it says in Deuteronomy 20, verse 3. Do not be faint of heart, nor be alarmed. Do not flee, and do not be frightened before them. Mifnehem. And he goes on to say afterwards, and not only that, but all the blood of Israel hangs around his neck. If he did not win and did not fight the battle with all his heart and soul, he is like one who spills everyone's blood, as it says in Deuteronomy 20, verse 8. Lest he not melt his brother's hearts as his has, making them fearful. It is explicitly stated in the tradition that, quoting from Jeremiah 48:10, cursed be he who does the work of God sluggishly, and cursed be he who keeps back his sword from blood. However, anyone who does fight with all his heart, without fear, and his intentions are only to sanctify the name, the Shem Yechud, the unification of God's name, it is promised that he will not be harmed and nothing bad will happen to him. He will build an upright home in Israel, and he and his children will earn merit forever, and merit olam haba, the world to come, as it says. Certainly, God will make for my master a faithful house, for the wars of God does my master fight, and no evil will be found with you all your days, and the soul of my master will be bound up with the soul of the living, with Hashem your God. And that's a quotation from 1 Samuel 25, 28 through 29. Fascinating commentary from the Rambam. What the Rambam is saying is, when the Torah singles out 4 individuals who are not eligible to go into war: the man who just built the house, the man who just built the vineyard, the man who just got betrothed, and the person who is afraid. All of them have the same thing in common. And what the Rambam is talking about here is something fascinating, is that this war is not just on a physical battlefield, but this is the war that we go through together in life. That there is Kol Israel Aravin Zeh Lazeh. There's an accountability that the actions of one Jew can affect another Jew. And therefore all the blood of Israel hangs around his neck. The Torah prohibiting from a person going to war, building a home, the Torah is singling out an individual who is more concerned about their worldly affairs. They're not focused upon the actual main thing, the battlefield of life. And so they're concerned that I may not make enough money to do this. I may not be able to settle down with that significant other, to have kids at this age. The Torah is talking about people who are more concerned and fearful about what's happening in the world. I'm concerned about the economy. My stocks right now may plank, my pension may tank, whatever the case may be. The Rambam is saying, if this is you, you're a coward. You're a spiritual coward, is what the Rambam is calling you. People who are more concerned about that, they are not built to fight in the army of Hashem, the spiritual war, because they're only going to be concerned about money and other things that are happening. And these individuals, they're not designed. But as the Rambam tells us here at the end of his quotation I just quoted from, the one who is invested in sanctifying the name of Hashem, even through the difficulties of life and what they're going through, they will not be harmed. No evil will befall them. They will go and build upright homes. Oh, Hashem will make sure that they get their blessing. No doubt about it. They will have a good life with their wife and their children. They will also merit life in this world and definitely life in the world to come. And the quote there that we find for Shmuel sums it up very, very eloquently. The soul of my master will be bound up with the living, which is a reference to the Shekhinah, bound up with Hashem. Because when you're serving in the army of Hashem, you never have to worry about what's happening in this world. And so what I would like to say here in closing for this teaching about conquering the beginning from the end is that as we come to the end of this Hebrew calendar year, you may be finding yourself in the war-torn trenches of the battlefield of life, and you don't know what the heck's going on. Figuratively speaking, there's all types of bullets and shells, firing over you, mortar rounds, right? All types of things going on. And you may see some of your fellow brothers and sisters out there, they're tattered up from life. Everyone's going through it. But don't lose faith. Don't lose hope in Hashem. Everything you're doing is for the L'Shem Yachud, the sanctification of God's name. And which means that as you have faith to trust Hashem in what you're going through, He will bless you in the up and coming year. You take heart, you do it with joy. And here's the even greater thing about this, as we learned from Shevet Gad, a name that was associated with idolatry. Some of you may come from a background, maybe involved in secular activities, and you think, I don't have any good yichus here, good pedigree, strongness, strength. That makes it even better, because you can destroy that system that you came from out of. You can conquer it because you come from that. Like Israel was able to collapse Mitzrayim because Moshe came from out of that system. And so many of us may come from a system. Hashem could use us to collapse it and draw blessing from out of it. That is the lesson the Torah is teaching us, that we have to have that emunah betachon, that faith and trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so with that said, Chavarim, that's going to bring us to a close here for the teaching on Parashat Shoftim. And once again, if our teachings here are a blessing to you, and you would like to donate, we thank you in advance for your support. You can find a link to donate. Your financial support enables us to continue to put these teachings together. So we thank you very much. And if you have any questions pertaining to the Torah portion, you need any clarification, please feel free to send me an email. I will answer those in the order that they arrive in. Until next time, Chavarim, may the God of Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov bless you and your family. Shalom and Kol Tov.